Here's the thing. A lot of members of the left are starting to realize that wokeness is destroying America, which is why, of late, you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up. And so I'm fine with using the term wokeness. I intend on continuing to use that word. It is their fault that it became a poisonous word, not mine.
Wokeness. It's everywhere. Whether you're scrolling through social media, watching the latest Netflix hit, or just ordering your morning coffee, it seems impossible to escape. And you know who's never afraid to tackle it head-on? Ben Shapiro. Love him or hate him, Ben has made it his mission to take apart woke culture piece by piece, and he's not holding back. Let's pause for a second to discuss the term woke asterisk. Here's the irony. The same people who popularized it now say we shouldn't use it anymore. Why? Because it's become controversial. Ben's not having it. As far as he's concerned, they made it a thing, and it's not his job to stop using it just because they're unhappy with where it's gone. Ben argues that wokeness is destroying America, and a lot of people seem to agree. Remember that video I made about him? The one that went viral with thousands of likes and comments? Clearly, his message is striking a nerve with many of you. Before we continue, can I ask a quick favor? If you're enjoying this content, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch without subscribing, and while it's free for you, it helps us out a ton. Subscribed? Awesome. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to why Ben is so fired up about wokeness. He believes it's built on a foundation of lies, not just a few, but 4 major ones. Wokeness spreads lies about America's core values. It distorts the narrative around inequality. It undermines the importance of personal responsibility. And the biggest one? It warps our understanding of truth itself. Ben isn't afraid to call these falsehoods out, and his unapologetic approach is clearly resonating with a lot of people. Whether you agree or not, his arguments are sparking a nationwide conversation.
Lies. It promulgates lies about the nature of the United States. It promulgates lies about the nature of inequality. It promulgates lies about the nature of responsibility. And finally, it promulgates lies about the nature of...
But here's where it gets really interesting. Ben argues that wokeness isn't just a flawed ideology, it's practically a religion. And honestly, when you think about it, that comparison seems pretty spot on. According to Ben, wokeness has all the traits of a cult, complete with its own rigid set of rules. The only problem? The rules are constantly changing. One day, you're woke enough, and the next, you've unknowingly crossed some new, unspoken line. It's like a game where just as you think you figured out the rules, they get rewritten, leaving you scrambling to catch up.
Impenetrable code. The code is constantly changing and is constantly moving. You have no idea what the standard is from day to day, but that code is brought to you by a pretty sleek haste of really intelligent and woke people who will be able to absolve you of sin so long as you listen to everything they...
Ben paints a vivid picture of a woke priesthood, the intellectual elite who control the narrative and decide who gets redemption as long as they stay in line. It's a clever comparison, and Ben argues that this constant shifting of rules is not only confusing, but also dangerous. How can you follow something that's always changing? Eventually, it leads to chaos. But Ben doesn't stop there. He takes a shot at the woke crowd, likening their belief system to a cult, not just because of its rigid doctrines, but because of how they enforce them. Think about it. If you align with wokeness, you're absolved of any wrongdoings, as long as you believe you can do no wrong. But the moment you challenge the dogma, the consequences are swift and severe.
Who do not mouth the proper catechism are immediately destroyed, and there's no forgiveness.
The woke mob shows no mercy for those who stray from its doctrine. Sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like something out of a dystopian novel where people live in constant fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that in this woke world, the rules do exist. They're just made up by the people in charge. And if you don't follow them, you'll face consequences. Even major brands are jumping on this bandwagon. Take Ford, for example. They released a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride Month, doubling down with another one featuring a rainbow wheel rolling over a human face. The F-150, a symbol of rugged masculinity, is now showcasing rainbow colors. Ben isn't against brands supporting causes, But his point is that they're just hopping on the woke trend to stay relevant. Are they genuinely woke, or is it all just for the camera? But here's where things really get interesting. Ben goes further, pointing out the true gatekeepers of wokeness. And it's not just Twitter activists. According to Ben, the real power lies with the media, the New York Times editorial board, angry Twitter mobs, and late-night TV hosts. They're the ones pushing the woke agenda. And these gatekeepers themselves rely on woke intermediaries to interpret issues for them. Ben suggests it's gotten so absurd that these media figures have to consult their black friends to explain blackness to them, just to keep up the facade and avoid being labeled with accusations of white privilege.
Intermediary is fairly obvious, right? It is all the members of the New York Times editorial board. It is all the people who tweet angrily on Twitter. It is your late night host, but even they have intermediaries. They have to call in some of their black friends, as we saw on all of the late night TV shows last night, in order to interpret blackness for them so that they can absolve themselves of the—
Ben is on fire at this point. He argues that woke culture is unforgiving. If you don't recite the right woke catechism, you're finished. There's no room for redemption, and he's talking about cancel culture here. Once you're labeled problematic, that's it. It doesn't matter if you made a mistake years ago or if it was just a misunderstanding. If you cross the line, the woke mob will cancel you, and there's no second chance. Ben makes the case that this lack of forgiveness is what makes wokeness so dangerous. There's no space for nuance or personal growth. It's all black and white. So how do you survive in this woke world? According to Ben, it's simple. Listen, repeat, and stay in line. Just follow the script and you'll be fine. But if you dare to think for yourself, well, good luck with that.
Conflicting things, and the only way to avoid the conflict is to just listen and repeat. Listen and believe, right? That's the basic idea here.
It almost sounds like Ben is saying woke people are mindless zombies, just repeating whatever they're told. It's a harsh take, but that's how he sees it. Then, of course, Ben tackles one of the most contentious issues in the woke debate, the difference between sex and gender. Woke culture insists that sex and gender are entirely separate, but Ben isn't convinced. He argues that gender is tied to biology, and if you try to separate the two, it simply doesn't make sense.
So one of the big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance.
Ben argues that if gender isn't tied to biological sex, then what's the point? It's a passionate stance, and he makes it clear that he's not buying into the woke logic. He even brings up his friend Matt Walsh's famous question. Asterisk, what is a woman? Asterisk, it sounds simple enough, right? But when Ben asked this question to a trans activist, the response was just silent.
To make what is a woman, define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
The activist tried to dodge the question by accusing Ben of using a logical fallacy, but let's be honest, it was a clear deflection. Ben points out that this is a common tactic. When faced with tough questions, woke individuals often pivot or shift the blame onto the person asking. But Ben wasn't backing down. He then took on the medical consensus surrounding trans issues, arguing that politically motivated doctors are pushing a false narrative. If a doctor denies the biological differences between males and females, Ben says they're not practicing real science. They are allowing their politics to guide their judgment.
Yes, I disagree. Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven, quote-unquote, doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female, a sexual dichotomy between male and female, they're ignorant, and they are letting their politics get—
Ben's not just going after activists anymore. He's calling out the entire medical establishment for bending to woke ideology. And here's where he really drops the mic. Anyone who suggests that there's such a thing as a pregnant male isn't a doctor. They are an activist. That's the kind of statement that makes you pause and really think, whether you agree or not. Ben isn't holding back here. But let's not forget the most ironic part of woke culture that Ben highlights. The idea that both speech and silence are considered violence. Yes, you heard that right. If you speak and someone doesn't like it, you've committed violence. If you stay silent, that's violence too. It's a classic no-win situation, and Ben's take. It's ridiculous. How are we supposed to communicate if everything we do is seen as offensive or violent?
I used to hear this when I would speak at college campuses. People were literally chanting speech is violence when I spoke at UC Berkeley. Also, silence is violence. So if you don't speak, that's a form of violence. So if you do speak and we don't like it, that's violence. If you don't, people are filling a God-shaped hole in their heart with performative virtue signaling. And what the virtue signaling is really designed to do in the end is to